What is going on, everyone? I hope everybody's enjoying their week. If you're new to my channel, my name is Black Opinion the Apple Guy, and today I'm just going to talk about a subject, something that I have actually looked up myself, and a lot of people have actually asked themselves, and that is which SD which SD card should you use when shooting video footage? Now, there really isn't any specific right or wrong answer, and what I mean by which one you should use, I'm referring to which size should you use. Should you use a 64 gig or should you use a 128? As usually these questions are kind of, I wouldn't say hard to answer, but a lot of people, including myself, have been confused with how to go about finding the information. So I thought I would just do a quick YouTube video and just kind of show you the differences between these certain sizes and I'm going to use them on my G85 as well as using it on my GoPro. Now, relatively speaking, when it comes to the size and how much you can record on your SD cards, that's going to be determined by your camera. So what do I mean by that? Basically, depending on how much you paid for your camera, that's going to determine the resolution, and the resolution is going to determine how much of that you can fit onto an SD card. So obviously, having a GoPro Hero 7 as well as a G85 Panasonic, that's going to be different for me as it would be for anyone else. So say someone who has like a Canon or multiple Canons, or just shoots with just a GoPro, or has a Sony. So typically I shoot everything in 4K. So on my G7 currently right now, I shoot in a 4K at about, I believe, 30 frames a second, as well as on my G85 I believe I shoot in about I think 4K at I think the same 24 or 30 frames. I think it's probably 30. And on my GoPro I shoot at about 1080 at 60 frames because I just like 1080 on this, although occasionally I will shoot at 4K at about 30 frames a second. So typically I usually have more than enough space for the GoPro because that runs at 128. But when it comes to shooting on my camera, I've learned that typically having 64 gigs versus 128, it's not really going to work well for me because 64 doesn't really allot me a lot of space to shoot, especially if I do a lot of mess ups or multiple video takes. Then 64 tends to, kind of add up really fast. So I've been looking online and just kind of before I actually bought the 128 gig, I actually was looking online to kind of figure out what is the best SD card for shooting in terms of how much size do I need actually in order to record video without having to worry about maxing it out. And I've come to the conclusion that it really just depends really on your camera. Again, I bought this Panasonic G7 and that's a $500 camera. It does 4K as well as 1080, whereas most cameras in the same price range that people buy are only capable of doing 1080. So again, that right there is a difference between those cameras and mine, is I can shoot mine at a higher resolution, whereas they cannot. So most people who usually come to me, and even my subscribers who usually ask, well, what size SD card or micro SD card should I use when recording videos? Should I get like a small amount? Should I get a larger one? And so today I'm actually going to answer that in this quick video. And again, I'm not really going to go into like the super specifics such as read and write times, because I still myself am really unfamiliar with the differences between read and write times. I'm just basically going into just the bare, this size get you this many shots, this size get you this many shots, and then kind of go through the different resolutions based on the size of the SD card that is in the camera. And what we're going to do is we're actually going to use my G85 as the quote-unquote guinea pig. So let's get started. So the first thing we're actually going to use first is we're going to use the 64 gig first. So I'm going to slap that inside my G85. So as you can see, there's no SD card in it, but I am shooting at 30 frames a second on this, and I'm going to show you that by hitting the enter. Then where it says record quality, I'm going to show you, click on that, and again, as you can see, it's showing it at 30 at 4K, 3840 at 2160 at 30 frames. So we're going to exit back out, and in the top corner it does say 4K at 30 frames. So we're going to take my 64 gig, and we're going to insert it in the camera itself. Now, as you can see, as we immediately put it in, it pops in at only an hour and 24 minutes of recording time. So basically what that is saying is that I only have an hour and 24 minutes to work with when it comes to recording video on my G85 if I choose to shoot in 4K at 30 frames a second. Now say I want to lower it down to another resolution so that I can get more time. How much more time will I get? That's simple. We'll just go back into the settings, go back into record quality, and then tap on this. Now we're going to bring it all the way down to where it says full HD or 1920 by 1080, and then at 60 frames a second. Click on that, exit out, and now as you can see it jumps from an hour and 24 minutes to 5 hours straight. So basically what that is meaning is that I can take my camera, and if I want to shoot video footage in 1080 at 60 frames a second, I actually have the ability to do that for 5 hours straight, filling it up without having to worry about, do I need to swap out my SD card? Because again, I have 5 hours worth of shooting time to shoot my videos. Now, a lot of people who come into question as to, is that going to be more than enough for me? Again, if your camera is limited to 1080, then that really just breaks it down to, can you do 1080 at 60 or 1080 at 30 frames? Is there going to be that much of a time difference? So we'll go in and we're going to change the record quality to 1080 60 to 1080 30. And we're not going to do 720 because no one does 720, so we'll do it at 1080 at 30 frames. Click on that, exit out, and that gives you 6 hours and 41 minutes of recording time. So again, as you drop down in frames, the more the time goes up. So as you can see, 6 hours and 41 minutes versus 5 hours. So that gives you a significant amount of time to do more videos if you wanted to do at say 30 frames a second at 1080. Either one is fine, but that is what you'd be looking at if you wanted to do any type of footage and your camera was limited to just strictly 1080 at either 60 or 30 frames, and that's with a 128. Now say, or I'm sorry, that's with a 64 gig SD card. Now say you wanted to shoot at say using a 128 gig SD card, and then as you can see, this is at 1080 at 60 frames. As you can see, it jumps up to almost 10 hours at 1080 60 frames a second. And again, if we're going to shoot it at say 30 frames a second, then that gives you 13 hours of video recording. And again, that's depending on the limitations of your camera. If your camera can only shoot at 1080 at whether 30 or 60 frames, then either one is fine, but I would recommend just shooting it in 30 frames, as I don't think there'll be that much of a frame loss if you're doing between 30 and 60. Now say you want to do say 4K, you want to know what kind of storage and recording time you'd get with 4K. Well, that's simple. First we'll do the 24 frames. This is 4K at 24 frames a second. That gives you 2 hours and 47 minutes. And then again, if you decide you want to up the frame rate by 6 frames at 30 frames, it gives you 2 hours and 47 minutes. So again, it doesn't matter whether you're shooting in, it doesn't matter if you're shooting in 4K at 30 or 4K at 24 frames. It's going to give you the same amount of time. You just simply would just render it down from 4K 24 or 4K 30 to 1080 at 60 frames a second. Now, when it comes to the GoPros, that's going to be a little bit different because GoPros use a different type of format when it comes to doing the videos. All these cameras that you shoot, depending on the brand, at least for some, most people are going to shoot in the MP4 format. At least that's what I shoot at, is in the MP4 format, whether I'm using my G7 or I'm using my G85. Now, what if you're using a GoPro and you wanted to know what type of storage and 40K, 30 frames a second, which is typically what I shoot this at. So as you can see, I'm getting about 3 hours and 51 minutes of recording time on the 4K 30 frames a second. Say I wanted to swap that 4K 30 frames to say 24. Will that up it a little? We'll see. And no, it still shows it at about 3 hours and 51 minutes. So maybe if you shoot it at 60 frames, would you lose any more time? And we'll see. 3 hours and 6 minutes. So as you up the frame rate, so does the time drop down. Not a lot, but enough. So typically then you would just shoot at 4K at say 30 frames, and then again that'll still be just as fine whether you're shooting it in the 4K at 30 or the 4K at 24. Now say you have, say, a GoPro, not the 7, but say you have like the white or the silver, and you want to shoot it strictly 1080, then you simply would just 1080, and we'll put it at, say, 60 frames. As you can see, that gives you a significant amount of time, more time. That gives you about 6 hours and 14 minutes of recording time. So basically what that means is you can record on this continuously for about 6 hours before it either overheats or before you fill up the SD card. So say you want to drop it down to, say, 30 frames a second, because no one really does 24 frames a second when it comes to 1080. It's either going to be 30 or 60. Then you get 6 hours. You get 6 hours and 14 minutes, again, of recording time. And if you want to do it, say, a more slow motion look, more cinematic looks, then you would do, say, either 120 or 240. Most people like to do the 120, so we'll do the 120, and then you get about 3 hours and 51 minutes, basically the same as the 4K if you were shooting it in 4K at 30 frames or 24 frames. And then, so we're going to switch to the 240, and we're going to see what you get with that. And then you get 3 hours straight. So as you up the frame rate, so does the time tend to drop on this. So say you decide you just want to do 4K at, say, 24 frames, because you just want to do 24 frames. Will it change? 6 hours and 14 minutes. So basically it's going to be the same whether you're doing 1080 at 24 frames or 1080 at 30 frames. That still gives you 6 hours and 14 minutes. Or whether you're doing 1080 at, say, 60 frames, that gives you 6 hours and 14 minutes. So there's not a lot much difference between which frame rate you're shooting at. If you're shooting it in the 1080 frame rate, whether it's 30, 24, or 60. But if you are shooting in 4K, keep in mind that you will chew up a lot more data onto your SD card if you're using that. And again, this is a 128. This isn't a 64 that I have in here. This is a 128 micro SD card that I have currently in this one. So if you buy a 64, then you can imagine just having the time on that. And then what you could do with a 4K at, say, 3 hours is now, say, either 2 hours and 50 some odd minutes or 2 hours and 30 minutes. And again, that depends on how you shoot your footage, especially if you're going to be out all day. That's not really going to cut it shooting it at 4K at either 30 or 24 frames. So even if you try to say, I want to use a 1080 then at 30 or 60 frames and using a 64 because you're trying to save money, it's not really going to, it won't really cut that much into your video recording. It probably might have it, but it really depends again on how much you're looking to do your video recordings. And that is the difference between a 64 gig SD card and a 128 gig SD card. Now again, the size and the amount of information that you're going to be using for these SD cards is determined by the type of camera that you get. Again, with the G7, obviously I can shoot in 4K, which I do shoot in 4K, so obviously using 64 gigs on shooting 4K with 64 gigs is clearly not enough space, as I showed previously, that you get about an hour, at best hour and a half, versus, say, if I shoot everything at 1080 at 60 frames, I get a little bit more time, versus when I use the 128 gig SD card on the G85 and 64. As you can see, the comparisons, the higher the lower the resolution and the frames per second, the more recording time you have. So you really kind of have to balance between what you want. Again, that really is depending on the camera that you buy. Like I said, most budget cameras around the $300 to $500 range are typically only going to be able to do the 1080 at 60 frames or 30 frames, or even the higher frame rates at 120 or maybe at 240, depending on the brand. And then as you get into the much higher end brands or the higher end models of cameras, then you're talking about 4K, then it is a good idea to invest in a much larger SD card. Again, I have a link in the description for both of these. And I hope that this at least can kind of give you somewhat of an understanding, or at least help you in deciding in terms of what size SD card you should get, whether you should get a 64 or a 128. And again, I didn't want to go into the read and write speeds, because then that just makes it a little bit more complicated for a lot of people, and as myself is included in that, where you're not really sure what size you should get. Should you just get with the 64 because it's less expensive, or should you go for the 128 because You think that you want to shoot everything in 4K and 64 is just not enough. So again, that's going to be really determined by the person that's doing the video recording. And again, it just depends on the camera and the brand you get. Most Canons, typically under around, I think, $400, $500 something dollars, they're really only going to be able to do around 1080, so you should be fine with the 64 gig if you're not shooting continuously or shooting all the time. Whereas if you buy like the M50 or the Panasonic Lumix G7 or even some of the lower budget 4K models of certain brands, that depends on if you want to walk around with multiple SD cards, which is why you see a lot of YouTubers who mention that they have multiple SD cards with them, because even when you have that much amount of storage space, you can still run out of it, as you're not only just doing videos, but you're doing photos as well. So you do a lot of your photos in 4K photos, and that's just typically what a lot of these YouTubers like to do. But as for me personally, again, I shoot everything in 4K and then I render it down to 1080. So I hope this video was helpful. If it was, hit that thumbs up, hit that subscribe button, don't forget to hit that bell notification, that way you don't miss content when I drop it. And I want to bring up that I thought it would be good. It would be a good idea to do another giveaway. Now this one is going to be a little bit different than the ones that I've been previously known to do, such as doing the GoPro giveaways. This one I want to do something a little bit more special in a way, I suppose. Right now I'm currently at 325 subscribers, which honestly I didn't really think I'd even get that much in terms of where I was at a couple months ago to where we are now, even amidst what's going on with this, what's going on. So what I want to do is I want to give back to the community, basically the people that have been subscribed to my channel. I want to do a giveaway, and what I was thinking of doing is doing a camera giveaway. Now, nothing that's going to be so super stupendous as in like, a G85 or my, G7. I was thinking of something more in terms of something a little small, like a point and shoot, but nothing cheap. So I'm guessing maybe a Sony or a Canon. I'm not really sure which one. And so what I'm going to do is that when I reach 500 subscribers, I will do a giveaway. Right now, currently I'm at 324. So once I reach that 500 subscriber, then I will be doing a giveaway of a point and shoot camera. Again, I'm not going to be doing something super crazy, but this is going to be a lot better for those, especially if you're looking to start your first YouTube channel, or you already have your YouTube channel, but you don't want to use a camera, or you don't want to use your cell phone because you're consistently having to plug it in. This will give you a little bit more flexibility, and again, I haven't really decided on what brand I'm planning on getting, but it will be a good one, trust me. So again, I will be doing a giveaway of a camera once I reach 500 subscribers. Now, the reason why I wanted to do 500 subscribers is because if I do 1,000, that would be asking a lot, and I figure I want to do small steps, increments, so hopefully I can reach 1,000 subscribers by the end of the summer. But I want to get 500 subscribers by the summer, by at least summer. And I really want to thank everybody who has been watching my channels and who's been watching my channel and been giving me, lots of questions. And again, if you have any questions on any of the stuff that I have been doing, then just drop a comment in the comments below. Or if there's something you want to see, just let me know. Obviously, like I said, with this SD cards, a lot of people, including myself, have been wanting to know, what size should I buy? Should I get a smaller size to try and save my money, or should I upgrade to this? And again, I have a link in the description for the one that I bought from Amazon. It was actually a pretty good buy for what I paid for it. So again, I want to thank everybody for watching. And again, don't forget to hit the subscribe button, hit that bell notification, the like button. And again, I'll be doing a giveaway once I reach 500 subscribers. So thanks everybody for watching. And again, this is Black Pino the Apple Guy, and have a great week.